to what Jesus called fullness of life. Jesus teaches us to set our faces toward the cross and to move toward those things that frighten us with courage. That's really what our Lenten study book is about, The Shack, as the narrator Mac encounters God after the tragic death of his daughter. Jesus teaches us to pour out our hearts to God, not just in praise, but also in our grief and in our anger too. Because through that way of the cross, God can reach out to us and find our true, authentic, and naked self, and thus heal us and restore our faith. It's one of the lessons that Lent can teach us if we're willing to follow Jesus through these days in the wilderness that stretch between here and Easter. So what does this way of the cross look like? Our American Protestant culture is, as I said earlier, so relentlessly cheerful and death-denying that it is almost easier to start out by talking about what it doesn't look like. I love that joke that Brother Dan told, about, it's a classic, the symbol of the Jewish faith. The rabbi says, the Star of David. And the Catholic priest says, yes, the symbol of our faith, it's the cross and Jesus crucified. And the Protestant minister, dear Sister Jen, says, and lo, behold the symbol of our faith, the casserole. This is how we handle pain and suffering in our church. We reach out to one another, more often than not with food. I fear sometimes we have what amounts to almost a don't ask, don't tell policy, though, if you hear some of the stories that Jen and I hear in our contacts with you. In other words, we are so stoic in our tradition, in our Northern European cultural heritage, especially having our stiff upper lips, that we reveal our suffering only very reluctantly, even to our pastors. We may be struggling along privately in the way of the cross, but most of us were trained to make it look like it's just an easy walk in the park. I can't tell you how often it surprises me when someone tells me a story of almost unbearable sadness and then apologize to me for telling me. And I'm not saying this to criticize anyone for the apology. I do it myself. A couple of weeks ago, you remember, I told a story of my mother's death from the pulpit and got a little choked up. And many of you came through the line and thanked me for allowing myself to be that vulnerable. But I immediately apologized. I immediately felt embarrassed. It's just a gut instinct. But when we deny the way of the cross, I believe we truly do wall ourselves off from the love of Christ. When we are in pain like wounded animals, many of us, I think, are inclined to slink off into the bushes like wounded animals to be alone. And we're also as likely to lash out in anger to someone who reaches out a hand to help. I can't tell you the number of times that I've checked on somebody who hasn't been in church for a while and not heard from them that they have been sick, which might have been my fear, but that they had been well, but they had been sad, under stress. They had been going through a hard time. I knew a woman who had her third miscarriage, who just couldn't bring herself to come to church with all those happy children underfoot. A man who recently divorced, who just couldn't stand to come to church alone, and it just seemed everybody was in a couple. Someone who lost a job, who didn't want to come to church because they didn't want to have to tell the story of what felt to them like a failure. They were all walking the way of the cross and not by their own choice. And they made the assumption that we here, their friends at church, wouldn't want to hear about it. And in their defense, I have to say, sometimes they're right. I think of our wonderful talent show last night. We really do know how to have fun together. We love it, the laughter, whether on Saturday night or Sunday morning. Sometimes we're just not in the mood to hear something depressing. You know that feeling? You're trying to choose something on television, and the Marx Brothers always look so much more appealing than that documentary on Darfur. But if we don't feel well equipped, if we don't feel well grounded in our faith to receive bad news, when it comes our way, I think it feels like we're taking on water, so we feel this need to buoy people up right away. We so hope that they're fine. It's hard to give people room to not be fine. So we try to get folks to look on the bright side. Pastors do it too. And if I've done it to you, I apologize. We all resist the way of the cross. But some of you may have heard me say that I had a great friend in ministry, a pastor, who once said that one of the gifts that we Christians have to offer, the kind of sympathetic care that our deacons and Stephen ministers offer us all the time, what sets us apart is our ability to stand not on rock, not the rock of faith, but on that shaky, swinging bridge that we stand on most of the time of faith, that still miraculously is stronger than some people's wisp of a thread of faith. And when we do that, when we reach out to others, when we give them that gift, when we are willing to walk the way of the cross with them, to steady their steps, and encourage them, that is our call. So let's keep doing that for one another, people of faith. Let us continue to make it possible for the people of God, the children of God, to bring our full selves here to church and to pour out our hearts in prayer and praise, in anger and in grief. Thanks be to God for this good news. Amen.